Welcome to my story time by mybooksummary.com. Get ready for quick wisdom of countless stories and explore. The Crimean War, 1853 to 1856, is one of those conflicts that, when examined, feels like the world had a brief moment of collective chaos, and for reasons that often seem unclear at first glance. Unlike wars sparked by territorial expansion or ideological revolutions, the Crimean War had a unique mix of causes, ranging from diplomatic missteps to national rivalries to religious tensions. And even though it was fought in an obscure corner of the world by many of the great powers of Europe, its impact resonated across the globe. So let's dive into this fascinating and complex conflict, from its origins to its long-lasting effects. Introduction: a war of many causes and little glory. At its core, the Crimean War was a struggle over power, territory, and influence, fought between the Russian Empire on one side and an alliance of the Ottoman Empire, the British Empire, the French Empire, and the Kingdom of Sardinia on the other. What makes this war particularly interesting is the role that religion, geography, and diplomacy played in the lead-up to the conflict. And although it is often overshadowed by other wars in history, the Crimean War had a profound impact on the balance of power in Europe and beyond, altering military strategy, diplomacy, and the fortunes of empires. And let's face it, it was a war with its fair share of bizarre twists and turns. But before we get to the drama, we have to understand the key players involved: Russia, the Ottoman Empire, Britain, France, and Sardinia, and what they were fighting for. The seeds of the war: religious tensions and imperial ambitions. 1. The holy places and the Eastern question. The origins of the Crimean War are rooted in a combination of religion and imperialism. At the heart of the conflict was the Eastern question, which essentially boiled down to the issue of what should happen to the crumbling Ottoman Empire. By the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire was a sick man of Europe, weak and losing territory to the encroaching powers around it. The rise of nationalism among various ethnic groups within the empire further weakened its hold on its territories. Russia, ever ambitious and ever keen on expanding its influence, saw an opportunity in the Ottoman Empire's decline. The Russians wanted to establish themselves as the protectors of Orthodox Christians living under Ottoman rule, particularly in the Holy Land, which was considered sacred to both the Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches. The Russian Empire demanded that it be given control over the Christian shrines in Jerusalem, a move that would give them religious authority and influence in the region. This idea, however, did not sit well with the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans had been the rulers of the region for centuries, and granting control to Russia would undermine their power. The French, who were the self-proclaimed protectors of Roman Catholics in the region, saw this as a direct challenge to their influence as well. This religious tug-of-war between Russia, France, and the Ottomans was the spark that ignited the flames of war. 2. The Russian ambitions, the Black Sea and beyond. Beyond religious tensions, Russia had broader territorial ambitions in the Black Sea region and the Balkans. The Russian Empire wanted to expand its influence over the weakening Ottoman Empire, especially in areas like the Crimea, which would give Russia more access to the Mediterranean Sea and further solidify its position as a dominant power in Europe. The Russians had long sought control of the Bosporus and Dardanelles Straits, key waterways that connected the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. These were vital for trade and military movement, and Russia wanted them for itself. But as Russia expanded southward, it began to threaten British interests in the region. Britain had long relied on its naval superiority and was keen to maintain its dominance in the Mediterranean, particularly to safeguard its trade routes to India and the East. Russia's encroachment on the Ottoman Empire was seen as a direct challenge to Britain's interests in the region, especially with the rise of Russian influence in areas like the Caucasus and the Balkans. 2. The outbreak of war. The Russian bear faces the European wolves. 1. The Spark, a disputed embassy and the battle for Jerusalem. In 1853, tensions between Russia and the Ottoman Empire boiled over. The Russian ambassador to the Ottoman Empire, Count Alexander Menshikov, demanded that the Ottomans recognize Russian authority over Christian holy sites in Jerusalem. This, of course, angered the French and the Ottomans. In retaliation, the Ottoman Empire declared war on Russia. But Russia wasn't just fighting the Ottomans. They were about to face a much bigger threat. Britain and France, both wary of Russian ambitions in the region, quickly came to the aid of the Ottoman Empire. The British were determined not to let Russia gain any more influence in the Mediterranean, while the French were motivated by the desire to protect their own Catholic interests and preserve their influence in the region. In a move that would surprise no one familiar with the diplomatic maneuvering of the time, the alliances formed quickly, and soon Russia found itself fighting a multi-front war. On the one side, Russia faced the Ottoman Empire. On the other, it faced the combined forces of Britain and France. 2. The battle begins, the Siege of Sevastopol. The fighting began in the summer of 1853, and the main theater of war was in the Crimea, a peninsula that jutted out into the Black Sea. The Russians had established a naval base in Sevastopol, and it was here that the war would unfold in all its bloody and tragic glory. The Siege of Sevastopol, which lasted for nearly a year, became the iconic battle of the Crimean War. The Russians, entrenched in their fortress, put up a stubborn defense, but the combined British and French forces were determined to break through. The battle was a grueling, trench warfare affair, with waves of soldiers charging under heavy artillery fire. The war also saw the advent of new military technologies, such as rifled muskets and steamships, which changed the nature of warfare forever. 3. The war on the home front, the role of women and the birth of modern medicine. The Crimean War is often remembered for the brutal fighting and the high casualty rates. However, it also marked significant changes in the role of women in wartime. Florence Nightingale, a British nurse, rose to prominence during the war for her tireless work tending to the wounded soldiers in the field. Nightingale's efforts in improving sanitary conditions and advocating for better medical care revolutionized the field of nursing and laid the groundwork for modern healthcare practices. 2. The battle begins, the Siege of Sevastopol. The fighting began in the summer of 1853, and the main theater of war was in the Crimea, a peninsula that jutted out into the Black Sea. The Russians had established a naval base in Sevastopol, and it was here that the war would unfold in all its bloody and tragic glory. The Siege of Sevastopol, which lasted for nearly a year, became the iconic battle of the Crimean War. The Russians, entrenched in their fortress, put up a stubborn defense, but the combined British and French forces were determined to break through. The battle was a grueling, trench warfare affair, with waves of soldiers charging under heavy artillery fire. The war also saw the advent of new military technologies, such as rifled muskets and steamships, which changed the nature of warfare forever. 3. The war on the home front, the role of women and the birth of modern medicine. The Crimean War is often remembered for the brutal fighting and the high casualty rates. However, it also marked significant changes in the role of women in wartime. Florence Nightingale, a British nurse, rose to prominence during the war for her tireless work tending to the wounded soldiers in the field. Nightingale's efforts in improving sanitary conditions and advocating for better medical care revolutionized the field of nursing and laid the groundwork for modern healthcare practices. Similarly, the war exposed the importance of military logistics and infrastructure. The unsanitary conditions and poor medical practices led to an extraordinarily high number of deaths from disease, far more than from combat itself. The horrors of the Crimean War would lead to significant reforms in military medicine and public health. 4. The war's end, a stalemate and the Treaty of Paris. By 1856, the war was becoming unsustainable for all parties involved. Despite Russia's early gains, the combined British and French forces, along with Ottoman troops, had made significant progress. The Siege of Sevastopol had turned into a prolonged, bloody affair, and Russia, unable to sustain the war effort, sought peace. The Treaty of Paris, signed in 1856, brought an official end to the war. The treaty saw the Russian Empire cede some territory, including the mouth of the Danube River, and agreed to demilitarize the Black Sea, thereby limiting Russia's naval presence in the region. The Ottoman Empire, despite its participation, emerged relatively unscathed. The war itself, however, had not brought a clear victory to any side. It had been a conflict marked by mutual exhaustion and a recognition of the need for peace. The legacy of the Crimean War, a changing Europe. The Crimean War had a lasting impact on European politics. It marked the beginning of the end for the Russian Empire's ambitions in the Black Sea and the Balkans. But it also led to changes in the diplomatic landscape. The war exposed the weaknesses of Russia, which would eventually lead to reforms under Tsar Alexander II, including the emancipation of the serfs in 1861. The British, despite their victory, faced criticism for their poor military leadership and outdated strategies, leading to reforms in the British Army. The French, meanwhile, gained influence in the Middle East, but were also drawn deeper into European conflicts. Perhaps the most profound legacy of the Crimean War was the way it demonstrated the shifting balance of power in Europe. It marked the beginning of modern warfare, with new technologies and tactics coming to the forefront. And while the war may have ended in a stalemate, it paved the way for future conflicts and alliances that would shape the course of history. Final thoughts: a forgotten war with enduring lessons. The Crimean War may not be as well remembered as some of the other conflicts of the 19th century, but it was a crucial turning point in history. It marked the end of Russian expansion in the Black Sea, the rise of modern warfare, and the birth of military medicine. And while the war was fought for a host of reasons, religious tensions, imperial ambitions, and diplomatic missteps, it left behind a Europe forever changed. The Crimean War serves as a reminder of how often wars are fought not just over territory, but over influence, ideology, and power. And perhaps most importantly, it shows how nations are often willing to sacrifice lives and resources in the pursuit of these goals, leaving behind a legacy that continues to shape the world we live in today. Stay tuned for more enlightening content. Head over to www.mybooksummary.com. Don't forget to subscribe and share the magic with friends. And let's grow together through the power of books and interesting stories.